All right, let's get started. Welcome to my session at the MVP Days online. My session is all about 5 practical tips to secure your corporate data with Microsoft 365. I intended to share 10 practical tips, but since I only have half an hour, I'm going to share 5 practical tips this time. But let's get started and first introduce myself. My name is Peter Daalmans and I'm from Breda in the Netherlands. I'm a principal consultant at my own company and I'm a trainer, speaker and author besides that. I'm around in the IT industry for 20 years and I'm really active in the community. Wrote a couple of books, and since I am active in the community, Microsoft awarded me for the 7th time as an Enterprise Mobility MVP last year. Hopefully this year will be the 8th time. So this session is all about securing your corporate data with Microsoft 365. So I want to share some tips around identity, conditional access, resource access management, and app management. Also, a little bit about MDM, modern management, changes that are coming up. So, but let's get started with identity related tips. I want to start off with asking you a question. I'm sure I won't get an answer because it's a recorded version, but think for a moment. How many global admins do you have? If you have more than 5, you may want to rethink your current strategy, because the best practice of Microsoft is to use up to 5 global admins. But even better is using less than 5 global admins. And make sure that you have 1 or 2 in a safe, which you only use if there's an emergency. Uh, Use 1 or 2 as an emergency account. And for the rest, for your daily job, you don't, or you might not need a global admin. Use the role-based access control model in Azure AD. Roles are being added almost on a weekly base or a monthly basis. If you're missing a role, just go to user voice for the Azure AD user voice and request a new role. And if you get a lot of votes, the role will be added or might be added already. If you have Microsoft 365 E5 license, then you might want to look into Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, aka PIM. And with Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, you're able to get permissions, global admin permissions, or maybe Exchange Service admin permissions just when you need them. So in this case, a normal user needs an administrator for Exchange for only a certain amount of time, 1 or 2 or maybe 4 hours to perform a job. And after that, the permissions are being removed. So you don't have a lot of still um, administrators with a lot of privileges in your environment. Because remember, if you have a lot of privileged users, those users are a target for malicious people. Those users can be breached at some point of time if you don't use, for instance, identity protection or MFA. So with identity protection, which is also part of Azure AD, you can monitor for risks and risky behavior. And basically that's being done by default in Azure AD. If you don't have an Azure AD E5 license, It will still monitor for risks and risky behavior. But with Azure AD Identity Protection, we're able to perform automatic actions. So how is this done? Basically, what happens, Microsoft stores around 10 terabytes of data every day. And that's data around logging in from Office 365, but also login information around Xbox Live, all the live accounts, Microsoft accounts, etc., etc. And that information gives a lot of knowledge about where people are logging in from and what they are doing. And this is all anonymized, of course. It gives Microsoft also gathers information from the dark web. For instance, they can identify if they are looking for accounts which are part of an Azure AD of their customers. So with identity protection, we are able to identify and inform the customer if accounts are being found in the dark web which belong to their users, which belong to their company. We are able to identify if an IP that is being used is detected as a botnet, is part of a botnet. And if it's part of a botnet, then the device might be breached and the device might be using the identity also. Are they using an anonymous client, anonymous proxy client? Impossible travel. I'm logging in here now from Breda, and in 5 minutes from now, I'm also if somebody is using my account from Calgary or China. Based on that, the session risk can be calculated or the user risk can be calculated. So if a credential is being found in the public, then the user is being marked as high, the user risk. If the impossible travel is being done, then the session risks may be high, or anonymous client is being used, then the session risk may be high. And based on that information, then we can either allow access if nothing is wrong, or require MFA, or for also password reset because the password may have been leaked or breached. We can also deny access or allow limited access. So let's start with the end user demo. So in this case, I'm just logging in as Kenny at emskings.com. And I'm adding my password. Of course, I need to add the right one, and the session was expired. But here you see that I'm allowed access just using my normal browser. If I use a different browser, a so-called Tor browser, which is basically a browser using an anonymous proxy somewhere in the world, I can try to do the same. Go to outlook.office.com. And provide the same credentials again. Provide the same password. And then based on the information which is gathered by Azure AD, my sign-in has been blocked because there was an unusual sign-in. And in this case, it is using anonymous IP address. So this is basically done automatically and instantly. So the user, your identity can be protected this way. So if we quickly look at the end of the portal configuration, the configuration of the service, and we go to Azure AD Identity Protection, we see that a lot of users are being flagged at risk currently, mainly because I don't have MFA enabled in my accounts. And here you see that a summary of my risk levels and vulnerabilities which are being active in my environment. The policy which enforced the block access was basically this one. I targeted this policy to only one user, Mr. Kenny3, and if my risk sign-in is medium or above, then I block access. I could also allow access and require MFA, but either way, in this case, my identity was protected. So if we look at the overview again, then you see that earlier attempts are also being locked. Sign in from an anonymous IP address, and you can dig into this and see which user is being used. So in this case, in November, an anonymous proxy was used from Montreal, a couple of days earlier, Budapest, etc., etc. So it gives you a good view on how your identities are doing. Privileged identity management can be used to not only see how your environment is doing regards to the Azure AD roles. So if we look at the roles which are available, then you see that this is a complete list. And if you look at the memberships of the roles, then you can also see who has what role assigned in one view. Is it a permanent assignment, or is a user, called Bob in this case, is he eligible to request this role? Like I said earlier, it's not really good to have a lot of permanent assigned global admins or other privileged access of privileged roles assigned to a user. It's better to have them eligible and that they only request access to a role if they need it. So if we go to settings and let's quickly look at how a configuration of a role would look like. If I go to Conditional Access Administrator, then in this case, I can configure the maximum amount of time you would allow a user to have access before he needs to request access again. In this case, it is only 1 hour, and you can also require approval. In this case, it was set as just allow access instantly, but you can add a approval workflow to it so that a privileged role admin needs to approve access to a role before the user gets access, gets the role assigned. So you can do this for all standard roles in Azure AD. If you don't have this enabled privileged identity management, you can of course use the roles and administrator node in Azure AD. And I encourage you to use this because if you are only managing Exchange or only managing SharePoint, you do not need to have access to the global admin role. You can just choose Exchange admin over here. So a couple of conditional access tips. Use app-based conditional access if you want to control data leakage to either Exchange or SharePoint Online. You can enforce access to Exchange Online, for instance, that the Outlook app is being used, or the Edge browser, or the SharePoint app, etc., etc. Enable device-based conditional access, so you can manage what kind of devices are being used to get access. For instance, only managed devices. Be sure to look at and block legacy protocols like POP, EMAP, EWS with legacy authentication, because legacy authenticated apps are being bypassed by conditional access, because conditional access is all about modern authentication. If you are using apps for EWS using legacy authentication, this will be deprecated in Exchange Online in 2020. If you're using conditional access, always exclude one or more global admins from conditional access, because if something breaks or you don't want to lock yourself out, and if you lock yourself out because of everybody is being blocked by all users, all apps, then you need Microsoft to get access to your tenant again. And this, believe me, this happens a lot. So the general recommendation from Microsoft is don't use all users, all apps together in a block rule. Be granular. So if we quickly also look at conditional access, we have one EMS Kings website. We are protecting via conditional access, and here you see that it's conditional access doesn't apply to only Microsoft services. I have my own app here, but I can choose from a lot of different apps. As you see. So based on the conditions, in this case, I've configured device platforms for only iOS and Android, and we're only targeting this for modern client apps and the browsers. And then if we grant access, we require approved client app to be used. And an approved client app to be used is basically what I just described. One of the apps being supported by Microsoft and supporting the full Intune SDK and supporting conditional access. So based on this, those requirements, conditions, we grant access. If we, for instance, look at this one, it's again from the same website. We only want to enforce multi-factor authentication to provide access. So resource app and app tips. Tip 4 is basically around publishing internal resources. And with the Azure AD Application Proxy, you're able to publish internal resources without needing to expose your internal web services to the outside by using an internal proxy server. So what you need to do is install a connector on premises, and that connector needs to be able to contact Azure and needs to be able to contact the internal resource. If that's if the connector is able to do so, then we need to configure an Azure AD Enterprise app where we define the internal DNS name and the external DNS name, and then we publish the internal website accordingly. So by doing this, you're out of the box prevented by DDoS attacks. You can add conditional access to your applications which are being used internally. It integrates with the managed browser and Edge, and you can allow wildcard access if you have a lot of internal websites built under one DNS name. So let's have a quick look at the backend. Also, if we go to Azure AD, back to Azure AD, then we have then we click the application proxy, and you see that one application proxy is being installed. And if we go to the enterprise applications, then you will see that EMS Kings, the same app being used in conditional access, is being configured with the application application proxy support. So here you see the internal URL. It's basically a website on my domain controller in my lab. Don't do this in your in your own environment. It's your work. Always publish a different website. And this is my external URL. And basically, pre-authentication is done through Azure AD in this case. If you choose to use pass-through, then you allow access without any authentication. If you have more connectors, then you can divide them in groups servicing different parts of your environment, or creating some kind of fault tolerance. If you have internal using internal URLs, they can be translated also in the headers or application body if necessary. So if we add the public URL to Google Chrome, log in, we are targeted by MFA due to the conditional access rule we configured. So I need to verify my identity by pressing the pound key, and then I'm allowed access to the internal web service, which is pretty cool. So a couple of MDM related tips to finish off this session. If you are using Android, make sure you move off Android legacy management. Basically, Android legacy management is managing the device completely by activating device administrator. Google announced in December last year that basically legacy management will be deprecated in Android version 9 and will be removed in Android version 10, aka Q. Be sure to move to Android Enterprise. And with Intune, we currently support the bring your own scenario where a work profile is being created, and we only manage the work profile. So we can separate business from personal. We can build a so-called wall that work-related data cannot be copied to the personal space, etc., etc. So, and for the corporate-owned devices, Intune currently supports the device owner scenario. The corporate-owned single-use scenario is currently only supported, but the other versions for business-only work managed, where you have a complete device which is work managed, a corporate-owned business-only scenario, and a corporate-owned personally enabled scenario will be added later on, hopefully this year. So how are you migrate to Android Enterprise? Because this migration will impact the users, definitely. For the bring your own scenario, the users need to unenroll their device from Android Device Administrator and re-enroll the device into Android Enterprise with the work profile. For Kozu, Kobu, and Cope, the device needs to be resetted via factory reset, and then it needs to be enrolled through or via QR code or a QR code, a code, or NFC. So let's quickly have a look at how this looks like in the console. If we go to devicemanagement.portal.azure.com, which is pretty new, we can go to device configuration and then device profiles. And if we create a profile, we are able to select the platform. Here we see Android Enterprise, and here you can see the separation between device owner, which is currently only supporting device restrictions and Wi-Fi settings, and the work profile owner, where we basically have two options in device restrictions is to configure settings around the work profile, and we are able to configure a device password if required. For the rest, no device restrictions for the device itself are available, since we only want to manage the work profile. And if we go to device enrollment, we quickly are able to see the Android enterprise enrollment scenario. If we go to Android enrollment, kiosk and tasks, then we are able to create or view a QR code or token, which is being used to enroll the device in the out-of-the-box experience. With that, thank you for joining me today, and I hope those tips I shared are useful. If you have ideas, share your voice IDs on user voice. Microsoft Intune has one, Configuration Manager has one. Be sure to share them. The product groups are actively looking at those forums, and other users are voting up IDs. So be sure to share your voice over there. So thank you very much for joining me today. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out via Twitter or by using the other contact information shared on the earlier slides. Thank you very much and have a nice day.